starts the recording.
Okay. Hello, welcome to what to expect when you're expecting a GIS. So for me, the most painful bit about this presentation is that we're just going to scratch the surface on every topic. And I wholeheartedly think that every topic raised could be its own full-length presentation or discussion panel. So I'm going to do my best to stick to the script and not get bogged down in it. What was in the webinar summary is what we're going to cover. My style is less you need to do X, Y, Z, but rather to present a narrative and allow people to consider that in light of their own circumstances. If you have questions, throw them into the chat and we'll get to them at the end because I'm not going to go over time. If we run out of question time, I'll make sure to write down responses and they'll be provided afterwards, probably with the professional development hours email. Just to articulate it openly, knowing the circumstances behind a thing, problem, issue, task, whatever, is always of utmost importance. Let's get some background on me and the town of Prosper. This is me. If you don't know me, this is a list of arbitrary factoids that represent portions of my lived experience. I also really need to update this photo, but I love it so much. I come from a liberal arts background and spent my undergraduate looking at maps before finding out that you can make the maps and work with computers. My number one skill and driving factor is actually a series of personality flaws. I lust after shiny things and am a novelty seeker. I have a compulsion to solve puzzles. I hate not being able to do something myself. And I hate being told that you have to do something a certain way. I'm an introvert that does a lot of extrovert things. I'm also horrible with names and faces. One of the best things that you can do to prepare for a management position is to be active in a professional association like SCOG or ERISA Texas. This includes presenting at conferences. It will help you with time management. It is great for networking, and it teaches you how to work in teams without rigidly defined leadership structures, which is super necessary in local government when working with people outside of your chain of command. The best place on the internet is the GIS Discord. If you want to geek out to GIS, there are people from all over the world that are great to talk to and bounce ideas off of. Professionally, I've been working in GIS since 2014 when I worked for a private consultancy. I started working in local government in 2017 and moved to my current position in 2021, which makes me part of the Great Resignation, I guess. This is Prosper, super great. Used to be called Richland before the other Richland claimed that name. Now we're Prosper. Tons of growth in Prosper due to our size and geography. We'll hit build out quickly as well. Just to be clear, I did not build the Prosper GIS from scratch. It was previously maintained for more than a decade by a neighboring municipality through an ILA. I have the benefit of inheriting underground infrastructure layers, parcels, roads, addresses. The town has also maintained a long relationship with New Edge, who hosts our asset management system, CityWorks. So we're positioned a bit better out of the gate than similar new GIS programs might be. This is Prosper, 1982. At this point, it's mostly an egg farm run by the Mayherd family. And maybe what I love most about Prosper is the very defined geographic area. When I worked in consulting, it was for county-wide data sets all across Texas. It is super refreshing and nice to work in such a constrained geographic area. This is Prosper in 2000, really just a handful of communities built in the 20 years between these photos. This is Prosper in June of this year, and that's the context. We're a large community surrounded by even larger communities. While municipalities don't necessarily compete in the traditional sense of similar businesses in the open market, they are measuring sticks for each other, and citizens expect similar services regardless of where they live within DFW. This next part is to deconstruct some of the primary responsibilities of a manager. Depending on where you go, this looks different. Based on the DFW growth patterns, my experience should be pretty typical of these new towns and cities. So this goes back to context, right? A new city doesn't hire within a void. In a majority of cases, They are attracting workers from established cities. These staff have interacted with a variety of GIS. They understand the value, or at least understand the value of the GIS tools that they used in their own work, like an all-in-one map, asset management, or data collection. The first order of business will be replicating these tools, which of course requires prerequisites in the form of data, hardware, and software. But before we talk about that, let's talk about this guy. Before I met him virtually in 2018, my ideas about enterprise geospatial were pretty much your data goes in a database, REST services, web stuff, and you make stuff for your end users. The end. I'm watching the GIS Success webinar from Toby Soto, and I see Paul talking about the Slim Jim tool and using it as a report card for your GIS. And I'm intrigued because I'd never seen a maturity model that was straightforward or intelligible to someone not already fully steeped in GIS. This is a framework that can be adopted by any agency. It's utilized by quite a few departments of transportation across the US, and most recently, NASA has been adopting the tools and methods, and work continues on a number of variants to improve the model. So I reach out to him to ask a few questions, and he graciously provides advice for filling it out. Then at the end of 2019, he invites me to join a beta of his mass maturity model, the next evolution of the Slim Jim methodology, and that really changes everything for me. While the Slim Jim could be its own webinar, and should, the point of including it here in mine is that exposure to this tool totally reconceptualized the idea of an enterprise GIS. It was no longer have the thing, put stuff in it, make widgets for end users. It became a philosophy. Why do we have a GIS? How does it enable and enhance our workflows? How do we create the structures that it needs to grow and infiltrate all of our business units? An enterprise GIS is not a destination. It is not a checklist. It is not the latest version. It is the process of making sure that we provide the best value to our organizations. It's the system of continually critiquing and measuring our performance in relation to the broader organization to constantly realign our goals to the external reality. And when you start to see your GIS like that, you get opinionated. This is my departmental vision and goal. As a program manager, it is up to you to define your own. This idea is what I make sure that all of my actions align with. It goes like this. GIS isn't a database that has maps. It is all the databases. Hot take, I'm sure. What does this mean in practice? We, the data team, are providing return on investment or value. A business system lets you do a thing, a workflow. The data team takes those inputs and provides derivatives and value-added products. This is applied to anything. Asset management. We're not just recording what we did. We're able to ask questions like, which assets have more work actions on them comparatively? All of the location analytics type questions that GIS people should be familiar with, we use the same principles to answer other data questions. We, the data team, must integrate every business system. We are breaking down silos. There are no exceptions to data systems. The data team has to be knowledgeable and accountable to higher standards, such as CGIS for public safety data. Integration includes data hygiene and making sure every data set is linkable to a common standard, the GIS. Because the data is significantly less useful if it can only be applied to or within a single system. For example, water records by itself, not a great data set. Customers, usage. With a little bit of spatialization and cross-departmental use, you can find out what subdivisions use the most water, who in a subdivision uses the most water. You can pre-populate public safety premise information. You can find out renter versus owner information, and you can contact water customers to warn about upcoming outages. Another benefit of this absolutist stance is that we're not complaining that whatever department purchased a business system that wasn't quote unquote GIS friendly, because we were never at the table when the decision was made. When we rebrand as the data department, we are the table, and we help our departments choose business systems that meet their needs and provide value outside their own department. All of that was the context and background for one of the major tasks that I had to do last year: set up ArcGIS Enterprise, which is not the enterprise GIS, mind you, but definitely a technological component that enables our goals. So I'd never set up ArcGIS Enterprise in my previous organizations, and here I suffered quite a bit because I wanted to build it long-term right out of the gate. As an aside, I also didn't want to be scared about upgrading, which might be a mental trauma that all of us have collectively inherited from our organizations. Also, if you're not familiar with ArcGIS Enterprise, it is a series of server roles that hosts ArcGIS Online on-premise, known as Portal. So it allows the creation of self-hosted Esri maps and apps, the ArcGIS server, which includes REST endpoints, and the data store, which is the backend that enables the portal to work, along with the multitude of other server roles like Notebook, GeoEvent, Image Server, etc. If you're just trying to set up the base deployment, it's real easy. You click the button and you're off to the races. If you want to deploy across multiple machines, it is a little bit more involved. And this presentation isn't about deploying ArcGIS Enterprise. So joyfully, I get to gloss over all the details, but basically I read a book. If you get stuck, you can reach out to Esri Tech Support. The book here by Chad Cooper is a little bit dated now, but the process is nearly the same. Following along through the book and reading up on the Esri documentation, I was able to deploy ArcGIS Enterprise successfully. For me, the biggest hangup was our organization's lack of a wildcard security certificate and being able to articulate to our sysadmin the specs that I needed for each machine in terms of RAM, CPU, and ports open. Esri does a great job at laying out the barest minimum specifications that the software needs to run, but there aren't any great guides on ranges of specification that you might need. You're supposed to keep an eye on the usage and scale up as needed, or, purchase ArcGIS Monitor as part of your cluster. So this is great with a super responsive sysadmin, but could be frustrating if your IT moves at a slower pace. Other than that, I just remoted into each machine and ran the installation software in the appropriate order. Ideally, I did not want to do that. For a few months, I researched alternatives to the point-and-click installation of ArcGIS Enterprise. In turn, I decided that the technological hurdles were either too high or the instructions too complex. Now, almost a year later, we're getting ready to upgrade from 10.8.1 to 10.9.1, and I have an open Esri support ticket working on upgrading via the PowerShell DSC. Was a method that I did not end up using because I thought I had to have our single sign-on included at point of sale. This was not the case, so now I get to try and remedy that situation. And this gets to something that I probably haven't touched on yet, and that is the importance of automation. We only have so many hours in the day, and the more that you encumber that time with point-and-click workflows, the less bandwidth that you have. You eventually hit a wall and can't take on anything else, ever. So you get stuck asking for more and more bodies in your department, or you just accept that you never do anything more than your currently assigned workflows and whatever ad hoc projects that you're asked to do, which then come at the detriment of your currently assigned workflows. I also struggled a lot here, more than I should have. I think the title of the slide obviously gives it away, but let's work to how I got to that point. With our portal infrastructure behind the firewall, I see little reason to expose our REST endpoints publicly. ArcGIS Online is a great scalable platform, and if any of our apps go viral, I want Esri to handle that bandwidth and to not have the town's primary business infrastructure go down or become adversely affected because of it. Me, being the Python person that I am, wanted to do some sort of updating routine in Python to translate the entirety of our enterprise geodatabase to ArcGIS Online. While there are some straightforward ways, like exporting your enterprise geodatabase into a file geodatabase, that felt clunky and I wasn't thrilled with the export and import times. Then I went down this rabbit hole of feature collections and feature sets, and I found out that the ArcGIS API for Python feature set was not the same as the ArcPy feature set. And this wasn't a few afternoon thing either. It was legitimately weeks of trying and failing to get different things working. Then by accident, I found out about bulk publishing, and it is great and new in 10.7x. And I would like to go into the nuts and bolts of this a bit more, time permitting. So you register a data store. You can do this inside of ArcGIS Server Manager or within Portal. You'll use an SDE connection file. Once you've done that, you'll have a data store item in your portal. If you go into it and select the Layers tab, you'll see a screen where you can publish and sync your layers. The bulk publishing creates a folder in your ArcGIS server, and each layer is a replica on your production environment. The only time that you need to sync is when you add or remove feature classes or change their schema. So now that you have a service per feature class, you need to go into the ArcGIS Server Manager and enable syncing on them. The connection file also needs to have edit delete privileges. I also ran into some Python issues here and ended up changing all of them by hand, which was painful for my soul. The documentation in the new ArcGIS API for Python is a lot better than what was available at 10.8.1 and 10.9.1, so I'm going to also give that another go. And that might be another lesson that I've learned recently. Even if you can automate something, sometimes you have to be willing to walk away or to do things the manual way temporarily until you have more bandwidth to come back to it. While there's a cool XKCD comic about it, the only thing that I'd add is that if something frustrates you every time you do it, or you routinely procrastinate a task because you hate it, then you need to automate it. Once the sync is enabled, your AGO to portal collaboration will copy each feature service instead of referencing it. With the behavior of the replica and collaboration, your updates from portal to AGO should be substantially quicker, as they are only updating records that have detected changes and not a wholesale copy of each and every feature service per sync period. Setting up an AGO to portal collaboration is painless. Just a few clicks, export an invitation, import a response. I'm actually really looking forward to doing this with an outside agency, any of the neighboring municipalities. God tier would be getting the electric and gas providers on board. Cough, cough, hint, hint. Anyway, this whole process really extended from about November to March or so. I even redid my sync layers in June. So this wasn't a Herculean lift and doing it all in a weekend. While I see this kind of stuff as one of my primary job responsibilities, it all has to respond to the ebb and flow of the other demands and all the time that trial and error takes. Now that I've done it, I'd be more comfortable with setting it all up again. And I'm probably going to have to re-implement some of the stuff anyway as I work to rebuild the automation programmatically, syncing it every time. And I'm a working manager, not saying that other managers don't work, but in some organizations and in some team sizes, the majority of your job becomes the personnel management and administration. At this level, I still do all of that and the work of a typical GIS analyst and developer. So this is a breathing point of sorts. We took the briefest of looks at the philosophy of the GIS and some of the major hurdles of the last year in terms of building a physical infrastructure capable of supporting the internal and publicly accessible GIS. This next part is a highlights reel of projects that shows the kind of spread that a person could expect within a local government. Because we love context and memes and also context and also memes, a lot of my work when I first got here was figuring out what to do about this situation. I think you may be able to guess my position on this. During my interview, I even threw it out there as a hot take. I knew it was not a safe or popular opinion, but I thought that it was important to show that I had distinct viewpoint and considered the organization's context. And to back it up, there are only so many hours in the day. If you want to redo the work that another agency is assigned to do, you certainly can. If you are frustrated with their quality of work, that's a transactional relationship thing and one that you can work with that agency on. There are plenty of responsibilities that are within the sole purview of a municipality, and those are my primary focus. As spatial professionals, I think that we can understand we are all interconnected. Striving to be totally independent of everyone else is an expensive luxury that you pay for in people hours. So yay, federalism. But like everything in life, it's nuanced. We're a small municipality, so our data needs to extend beyond our borders to have more context and a better interface with our neighboring municipalities for purposes of mutual aid. Largely, though, despite the existence of a council of governments and a state-defined regional area, we need to reconcile and translate schema from 2 appraisal districts for our parcels layer and 2 emergency communication districts for our roads and addresses. This process of grabbing data, changing it for a purpose, and putting it into your enterprise geodatabase is called ETL, and initialism for extract, transform, load. As the data department, this is our bread and butter. Most of the data sits outside of the enterprise geodatabase and resides in a variety of business systems. This past year, I've spent a lot of time building automations to ingest this data from these outside entities for use in our internal production environment. And as much as I just love to talk about code the whole time, we're not going to do that. This is just to show a major project that I needed to accomplish in order to get a good stream of production data incoming. So I wasn't wasting time doing work that others were already doing. So a few things here. I use VS Code because it's the best. I use the black code formatter because I don't want to spend time moving code around. Notebooks are kind of a crutch, but I like them. So I'll be installing the notebook server as soon as I upgrade to 10.9.1. And I also intend to open source all of my code on GitHub because automations shouldn't be sorcery and we should be comfortable sharing, especially since we're in the public sector. I don't have confidential code or protected intellectual property. You can't see me right now, but I'm doing finger quotes. The more that we publicly share, the less people have to reinvent the wheel and the more we benefit from cross-pollination. This is a map book. All right. Oh, there we go. I know how to use a computer. This is a map book. I'm not a huge fan of printed products, but I understand why this is needed. If you were in a situation without access to internet, like some emergency or disaster response, then for sure you'd want a paper product. In ArcGIS Pro, you can utilize logic within Arcade to have certain features labeled in certain ways, all within the same labeled class. It's also important because I have less than direct control over those data layers. So instead of adding a new numeric-based field for the rotation, I can write an Arcade expression that takes the string, cast it as a number to feed into the rotation parameter for labeling. A road index is another nice to have. You need to dissolve the roads, split them at the grids and subgrids, and you're left with a table. You can insert a table in the layout view and then definition query them until you get the look right. There's still some issues with how they auto balance. That's a bug. So it is still a manual process. I'd love to see this feature evolve to a point where you could do a set of data-driven pages for a table to print. Here's a quick peek at the notebook that makes it happen. Where's that? Where's computer stuff? There we go. Here's a quick peek at the notebook. You'll see it's a lot of ArcPy stuff, ArcPy stuff. Then we concatenate it. Pretty good, pretty good. Okay, so we have another print product here. This is a thoroughfare plan map. It's a very large map when printed because people love large maps. This was meant to solve the problem of making the thoroughfare plan map digestible and to provide clarity to a layer that is normally visualized using single lines. This presents a problem as many of the arterial roads in a municipality have a final build out of 4 to 6 lanes, and those lanes are completed at different times. And personally, I'd never worked with a thoroughfare plan map that tracked statuses. Usually it was this is how it looks. So this product tries to chart a new course by tracking the statuses per lane and presenting that information visually. Paper does only get us so far, so I'd like to also make a companion web application, and I print it as a short link on the paper product. Here we go, on the paper product right there, the bloop, so that people that are using the paper thing can access the not paper thing and explore everything a little bit more interactively. What I love about local government is the variety of business units that I get to interact with. This project almost ended a lot earlier because everything in the GIS looked fine. When I started to look at the source documents like annexations, things didn't add up. So the request here was, which agency has enforcement responsibility along a certain road? I also learned a great lesson. Emails are almost never the appropriate venue for sharing your analysis. So Here are some excerpts from a 27-page slide presentation walking through my analysis. You have to know your audience, and while I could have highlighted some land calls to a GIS person or surveyor or boundaries lawyer to my police department, it was clear as mud. So you bring the context and tell the story. Here, it's less important what the documents say or even where the land is at this point, because we're just stating a document says something. We wait until later slides to be able to present it in a more meaningful way. So this would be the culmination of the previous 5 or so slides, all to get to this point that says, hey, this is what the border actually looks like. And then run through that analysis again for the other perspective. So at the end, we can contrast them in an intelligible way. You'll also notice that I'm not putting the most effort ever into these maps, literally screenshots and screen clips out of ArcGIS Pro, because it's a talking point. The important deliverable here is relaying the state of affairs, not a beautiful map that people hang in their office and stare at fondly. So at the end of this presentation, it's great, and I'm asked to go ahead and find incident response data along this corridor. So this gets back to a few different things. All databases belong in the GIS. Would not have been able to compile this data without access to public safety data. This honestly was the level of data that the police department was asking for, incidents along this road. But a few graphs don't tell a great story, or at least not as great a story as space-time cubes. So I did some space-time cubes because they're fun and they asked for several years worth of data. This does not tell you several years worth of data. I mean, it does, but to really start diving into it, you need to make some time series graphs, and then you're presenting complex visual things that people don't have a frame of reference for. And this time cube graphic goes beyond that. There were XREX in the area. You begin to see that everything really is localized to 2 problem intersections, one of them being a US highway. And when I presented this, there was an audible gasp, and the police chief said, this was the first time anyone had ever done anything like that for them. It's simple enough to look at and grasp what's going on. It tells a story. It allows a person to digest the business of the data. And of course, I made a companion web app with a short link. So although the initial ask was, hey, we need some stats, our police department is now aware that we can do these kinds of visualizations to tackle other problems, which led us into a rabbit hole about collisions along the US highway, which I'd already pre-populated the data into just in case. That's the end of that. So surprisingly, this next request came up as a result of our map book. Our fire department wanted building footprints for our community, something that I had for one of our counties, but not the other. See how all these problems are interconnected? I'd seen a few different presentations and read some article where the deep learning tools were mentioned or discussed, but I still felt like maybe exploring this thing would be a weeks-long endeavor. It is literally a single tool, single button click. Granted, a 13-hour button click, and one that requires the image analyst extension, but still look at these results. With no tuning required, I got a data set that I could then run conventional geoprocessing operations on to dissolve stacked polygons, remove footprints I didn't like. We also have a large archive of locally stored imagery, so I was able to rerun this process on a variety of seasons and get better results for areas that did not perform as well in my initial test. Ideally, I'd like some time to download the model and do some hyperparameter tuning, but for what I needed, this allowed me to move on with a fit-for-purpose data set. I did the LiDAR thing too. Thanks, Tinrus. You rock for making that data collection happen. Not too much that I want to say here. I followed an Esri technical tutorial step by step. With the machine learning, the commercial footprints came out poorly. With traditional LiDAR, the commercial buildings were much better. I will say the houses are more generalized with LiDAR and didn't retain the quality that was possible through the machine learning tool. I don't have any notes on this slide, probably because no one talks about it. It was a joke. Everything is scripted. While it's fun to rag on Esri a bit, The reality is, if the software does not work as expected, it's up to us to let Esri know via support tickets and bug reports. You can't expect the developers to fix an issue if they don't know that it exists. So these are my stats. I'm the only one in my organization that submits tickets. Regardless of your technical level, you should be submitting support tickets. If you are the administrator of your organization, then it is definitely your job to do that. The downside is that it takes time to resolve these cases. I'm a perfectionist, so I double and triple check to make sure that an error really exists and do some preliminary testing just to make sure. Some staff are going to not read your meticulously detailed notes and will instead call you out of the blue, ask if now is a good time to go over the case, and have you go to esri.com/assist and then give you the meeting ID letter by letter, open a Zoom, and insist on having you walk through a screen share to document the issue, which can be frustrating, especially if you're the kind of person to email someone first to identify availability, create a meeting invitation with a Zoom link for someone to click. Probably not a huge population of people. But I digress. What frustrates me more is having some software capability that I need not be available, or to have a problem and not know how to solve it. If you want these problems solved, you have to deal with it, schedule the time, and work through the process. If now is not a good time, let them know and get the case scheduled into a window that works for you. And yeah, sometimes you're on the phone for over an hour with Esri, and that's how it goes. I am routinely frustrated. So I make memes to express my emotions. Send in your error reports and make memes. This is something that I was totally unprepared for. 3 months into my first position, the frenzy begins of what we call budget season, basically 45 days where everyone frets about money and writing requests for new spending. At the end of it, department heads meet with executive leadership team to talk through their packages, strike items that are weak or can wait for subsequent years. This is then passed along to council, who has the opportunity to question items in an open meeting and ultimately votes to approve the budget or disapprove it. What I learned from this process is that writing is important. Your audience is finance plus the executive team plus council, all of which have absolutely zero use for jargon. With our budget process, we have several areas where we justify our request with data, outline consequences of not funding it, and how it aligns with council goals. So while our funding requests are evaluated per department, you're also in subtle competition with everyone else in the municipality that are asking for anything. So your budget package needs to be the most clear, compelling, to prove that your request has value. So what you can do in your current position is get involved. You want more GPS equipment? Write that package. Whoever currently does your budgeting is the person that you need to figure out how to help. Budgeting is less than fun, and that person should appreciate some help. The technical aspects of writing a budget package are not hard. You look up quotes for equipment you want to buy from commercial sites, request written quotes from vendors, or fill out position calculators for new positions. This requires some detail-oriented work and to look at a project from multiple angles. If you undershoot it, you'd be in the uncomfortable position of asking for more money mid-year, cutting corners, or having to put a project on hold for another fiscal year, which kind of explains some of the frenzy. My biggest advice here is to be budgeting all year long. If anyone wants to buy anything, record it in a spreadsheet, have multiple web links, and pre-write your budget items utilizing the templates that you're going to use anyway at budget time. And lastly, budgeting is an opportunity. One of my least favorite things is we don't have the money for that. That said, as the person responsible for budget for my department, it is my job to make sure that we have money to be able to do our jobs as effectively as possible. This includes the hardware, software, and training to keep pace in our industry. Not investing in your workforce is a recipe for employee disengagement and isn't defensible given the speed of advances in geospatial. I budget for GPS equipment, high-powered workstations, travel and conferences, professional training and books, professional certifications, professional memberships. I'm not sure that there's too much to say about enterprise license agreements. Instead of buying licenses a la carte, the idea here is you pay a lump sum for unlimited licensing. Let's say you are paying per license and you want to spin up a new collection app for a department that hasn't historically used GIS in your infrastructure. If you don't have any spare licenses or spare budget to purchase licenses, you're forced with a few unsavory options. One, charge the department a license to do a new workflow, or two, wait until the next fiscal year to budget for a new license. So you're constantly in a battle to estimate how many licenses you need and then to slow roll or indefinitely put on hold projects that didn't fit your estimates. Other departments don't see you as problem solvers because you're asking them for money just to help them when that's already supposed to be your job, or telling them to wait until next year to do something that they want done now. Your enterprise GIS should not depend on the budget of other departments. Your enterprise GIS should not artificially limit itself because you are not providing the resources that it needs to do its work. Sometimes the organization structures are not built to accommodate that method of thinking. That's okay. It's your job to change that. And we'll end here because it bookends nicely with what we discussed in the beginning. Another piece of administrative work that I did this year was to build a 5-year employee estimate based on a request from our HR department. This was a project to estimate what positions we intend on requesting to meet the projected business needs through 2027. Since I already had a very clearly defined vision of what I want my department to be, this was less painful than it otherwise would have been. I submitted positions for apps and business analyst, spatial specialist, and a database administrator. For me, I worked a lot harder on what the justification was going to be, defining the need that we would fill, and then trying to estimate when we would need each position to come online. Luckily, these are just estimates, but it was a great exercise to sit down and think about what new systems we were going to implement and how we would need to respond to those business developments, and then articulate how I wanted these positions to add value to other parts of the organization. And if I can digress just a bit here before we end, you need data to justify these estimates. We get data from a ticketing system. We track all of our requests, our routine work, and especially the time it takes to do any kind of task. I have all of our ticketing based on the Esri patterns of use. Why? 1, I'm Jack's greatest fan ever. 2, there's already an ecosystem and marketing structure to support explaining what those things are. And 3, we're an Esri shop. Anyone that has worked with Esri should have familiarity with these concepts, which means that continuity between employees should inherently be higher. You can't prove that you need more people unless you can prove that you're doing work and the kind of work that you're doing. So we track just about everything. And that's the end of my TED Talk. Hopefully there's tons of questions. I didn't look at the chat window and I'm out of breath.
All right, Jordan. Hey, thanks a bunch. It's a great presentation. So Matt, I think Matt's going to go through and take a look at our questions and read them off. And Matt.
Yeah. Thanks again, Jordan. That was an awesome presentation. I'm kind of scrolling through the chat box here. There's some earlier, some commentary on, perhaps not being Esri dependent and running, more open source software and stuff like that. But those are more commentary. So I'll start with a first question, a direct question here from Eddie Manguel. He asks, how often Esri bugs hinder progression on a project for client in your experience?
Ooh, I think I have 15. I think I've got 15 in the bag. So yes, they I guess maybe about 1 a month is what I'm averaging. And it does hinder stuff, but at the same time, I find workarounds, right? And Esri will, they'll try their best to help document a workaround, and that's fine. But yeah, it's frustrating, but it's also, a global system that people use in a million different ways. So there's, there's going to be stuff that they don't intend for it to be done with, and then you try to do anyway.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So Andy asks, how do you handle mechanical data that different business units see differently, i.e. roads that Public Works and 911 want segmented in different places?
Oh, so for me, the answer is different. The answer is different for everyone. For me, because we are utilizing the roads data set from our emergency 911 district. We do it the way that our emergency 911 district wants it. That data set is a little bit rigid. So what we have in addition to that are basically lookup tables, so we can further enrich that. But as far as geometry goes, yeah, there are some things that we probably wouldn't be able to do. But luckily, I haven't had those issues yet. But I think that my strategy is okay. But we'll see. We'll see if it's not.
Right on. Okay, so Tim Nolan asks, do you have a consulting budget to bring in extra help?
I don't have a consulting budget to bring in extra help. I don't have a base budget since I'm a team inside of the information technology department. When we become our own department, we will have a base budget. I'm generally less consultant happy because it's expensive, right? And I'm a fairly clever person, and I generally can figure things out. But I do get that sometimes you don't have bandwidth and you got to throw money at it. I'm not used to having money to throw at things until recently, and so I'm in this mindset always of we have to do it ourselves, which again is a viewpoint that you pay for in time.
Gotcha. Okay. So next question, Sean. How do you handle data governance, i.e. data owners, stewards, custodians, and stakeholders?
So we are going to implement a GIS governance structure. Right now, the way that it works is that business units own their business systems, and the data team takes those systems from the database level and does stuff, right? Enriches it or molds it in some sort of way. So as long as they have their workflows taken care of, that's kind of how that data goes. But we don't have anything where people are allowed to say, hey, you can't touch that. Ultimately, all the data belongs to the town, and we provide value for that.
Okay. Next question. Naomi asks, I have a kind of a chicken and egg question. How do you make estimates on what kind of personnel and technology and systems you need in 5 years if you have never built a system before? What kind of resources do you use? People do you bounce ideas off?
So what I used for our estimates is that a lot of business systems here in the town are either pen and paper or legacy. So we have an idea over the next several years of which departments are going to be purchasing what kinds of new business systems. So that's what I was able to base my estimates off of, is I knew that we were doing a enterprise license or an ERP and a permitting system. And so I was able to do some of that. But as far as like a crystal ball of where spatial is going, I don't know. I hope that we hire the right kind of people that are creative and can roll with the punches. But yes, basically my estimates were, I knew that certain departments were going to be looking to purchase business systems several years out.
Okay, great. So the last question we have here in the box. So real quick before I read this out, if you do have questions, please type them in here in the box, or feel free to unmute yourself and chime in vocally. So Kate asks, thanks, Jordan. Any tips for folks not in GIS manager positions who want to get them? How do you convince your interviewers when you didn't really have a previous experience in this?
Wow. So man, this to a T, if I could borrow Naomi's phrase of a chicken and egg situation, right? It's, hey, we want a GIS manager. Where's the GIS manager we can hire? So for my own personal situation, how I lucked out is that the IT director here knew that this was going to be a growing position, right? That it was going to start out as a department of one and then expand from there. So in his thoughtfulness, he posted the position as a senior GIS analyst to preempt current GIS managers really from applying and really market towards GIS analysts that wanted to move into that role. I get that is a super thoughtful position and not something that is generally what happens in the real world, right? Or when a manager leaves or retires or whatever. So what I was able to do in my interview of saying, hey, I actually have the chops for this kind of stuff, was to show that I knew the entire vertical of the GIS, right? From digitization or technician level work to regular types of analysis to programming and automation. Back before there was enterprise, I did some setting up of ArcGIS server back when that was the only component. So my rambling way of getting to the advice portion of that is that you need to have a portfolio that shows that spread. And while it might be difficult to do some of the management tasks, with a personal use license, you could spin up an ArcGIS enterprise deployment at home, use SQLite as your enterprise geodatabase and kind of show off some of those things in a small simplified setting. And that would be generally my advice, is to do what you can with what you have. I think maybe one of the drawbacks of that is it really relies on hustle culture and doing stuff outside of the clock, which not everyone is thrilled with. And so it's difficult. It's difficult if your organization doesn't have those promotion paths, because you really have to blaze some of that trail yourself.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I saw in your initial, looked like you're big on continuous training. You're taking some additional training work outside of your normal course of work. So I think, that's great. So we got a couple more questions rolling in here. So JMC asks, is it possible to implement and operate an enterprise environment without coding skills?
Yes, it certainly is. And I say that because I certainly am running a enterprise that does not use any coding skills. I think that there's a work that needs to happen on Esri's side to make those tools more accessible. Everything that I set up was point and click. All of the administration of it is point and click. It does not take up a lot of time, to be honest. I do not remote into my server computers very frequently, especially if you're able to have an enterprise license agreement or pick up ArcGIS Monitor. It'll proactively send you alerts when stuff is happening. However, I have had times where I've needed to scroll through the logs and research arcane error messages to figure out stuff that I messed up. So yes, you can run an enterprise without coding skills. With coding skills, it's going to be a lot easier, and you're going to save yourself lots of staying up late at the city at 8 p.m. because you gotta shut down a server and turn on all your services or something silly like that. It makes life easier, and it's worth learning. Python is not hard to learn. It is, if you approach it like a foreign language, it's a lot easier to understand. You're just talking to computers and telling them to do stuff.
Okay. So we do have a couple more questions here, so we'll try to kind of speed through these here. So Eddie has a question, again, regarding to employment. Says, as a manager, what is the transition process for a new GIS analyst hire, particularly one fresh from college? As with any team, there is a learning curve for learning the protocol and expectations on a team.
Ooh, so I'm a bad boss. I didn't mention this in my slides, but I'm not great. And I had an analyst and no longer have an analyst because of some of my own personal character flaws. That said, I've learned from them. I think I've learned from them. What I would do differently this time around is spend more time, make time, right? You got to make time to do the job shadowing in the beginning and to make sure that they understand things. Structurally, I have it to where you can spend half a day every week doing research and stuff. that you want to do to learn and expand your skills. But I definitely need to be coaching staff better and to be doing some structured training to impart the knowledge, right? Not everyone learns the same way. And I had too hands-off of an approach last time.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that's a very fair answer. So Richard asks, how does next generation 911 and GIS data needs factor into your work mandates and oversight awareness, i.e. future planning?
Not too much for me. You know, one of the benefits of doing the whole regional thing is that NCT 911 tells me what to do and I do it. And we're a great happy family because of it. You know, I think that I probably do need to capture some Z values on my things. And that's a pet project that's on my Kanban board that I've not done.
Okay. So Raphael asks, how do you handle the rejection of the new technology?
Ooh, man, I let it simmer. I had a department, theoretically I had a department that will remain unnamed, that I did some stuff for. I was like, all right, guys, this is the thing, and it'll be really great. And they said, okay, great, make us the maps. And I was like, okay, great, I did. And then nothing. And then a year later, hey, we got these maps that we need you to make, and would it be cool if we could do this other web stuff with it? Like, yes, it certainly would. And a year ago, I would have loved to do it as well. So I think that everything comes into its own time. I think that I'm fortunate that there's enough work to be done, that I'm not so much held up by resistance to technology in some quarters. And I think that in most organizations, public works is probably the laggard for adopting new things, but they're on the forefront with asset management. So I really don't have too big issues. But if you want to develop that rapport, you have to build relationships with those people, which means inviting yourself to management meetings and you know, bringing donuts and stuff. You gotta build a relationship so people don't see you as a threat. And then sometimes you just have to build the tools without being asked to build them and say, hey, look how great this is. But it's a process, but it's mostly it's a relationship one. It's not really a technical one.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we got about 2 minutes here, so we're going to go ahead and do one last question. This is from Bidemi, and he asks, what ways can the divide between IT departments and GIS be handled?
Oh man. In a different life, I had a divide between an IT and a GIS department. You know, it's a structure thing. It's a personalities thing. And if you are in an organization where there are people at the executive level that are not bought into the technology and they're not utilizing spatial in the manner that it needs to be used, then you need to go to a different organization. Eventually change will happen, but you're going to frustrate yourself and your soul and your sleep by sticking with an organization that's not utilizing things in best of practice ways. So sometimes you got to jump ship, and I guess that's a bit cynical take on it, but that was an experience that I lived in, and that's the path that I took, and I'm much happier now because of it.
All right, great. Well, we are coming up here on 1:00 p.m. There's a lot of messages in here in the chat congratulating you. Everybody loves the presentation. I completely agree. This was a wonderful presentation and a well-spent lunch hour here. So with that, Brian, do you have any closing comments or?
Yeah, Jordan, just thanks a bunch for the presentation. Matt, once again, it's always a pleasure co-hosting this with you. Addie, our president, is on here. Thanks for jumping in and taking care of some of the red tape. But I think I saw, Matt, about 140 at max. What'd you see?
Yeah, that's about right. 140, okay. maybe so slightly higher. Yeah.
It's a fantastic turnout. So we'll get this posted up to the Eureka Texas YouTube channel as soon as we get it put together and cleaned up and get it up there. We'll let you know. Hey, you all check out our new website. Everything's looking great. The QR code is down here in the bottom right and bottom. Well, the left is for attendance, the bottom right is for a volunteer. If you're wanting to hang out with us and network and have a great time, by all means, hit the QR code and get involved. It's a great organization, and we just keep growing and growing. And by the other cool thing is we're 10 years old this year. It's hard to believe that a lot of hard work and energy has gone into this, and University of Texas is 10 years old. So I'm going to let that be it. We will see you all next month in August. So hopefully it'll be a little cooler, but probably not. So y'all have a good rest of your day, and we appreciate you tuning in.